Ah, now we can begin. Good evening. Welcome to the meeting of the Skokie Village Board for Monday, October the 3rd, 2022. This evening, we will be led in the Pledge of Allegiance by Deputy Village Clerk Sylvia Luke. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The meeting will come to order, and the clerk will please call the roll.
Trustee Sutcliffe? Here. Trustee Robinson?
Here.
Trustee Kuhn?
Here.
Trustee Johnson?
Here.
Trustee Pierce-Slovan?
Here.
Trustee Klein?
Here.
Mayor Van Duzen?
Here, we have a quorum. Next item on the agenda is approval of the consent agenda for this evening's meeting. A motion would be in order. Trustee Pierce-Slovan, seconded by Trustee Johnson. Is there anything on the consent agenda anybody would like to have removed? If not, call the roll, please.
Trustee Sutcliffe? Aye. Trustee Robinson?
Aye.
Trustee Kuhn?
Aye.
Trustee Johnson?
Aye.
Trustee Pierce-Slovan?
Aye.
Trustee Klein?
Aye.
Mayor Van Duzen?
Aye, the motion passes. This evening, we have two proclamations. I would like to read each one. The first is dealing with Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Whereas domestic violence is a prevalent societal problem, harming victims, their children, family, friends, and communities at large. And whereas domestic violence knows no boundaries, impacts women, men, and children of every age, race, ethnicity, economic background, sexual orientation, and belief. And whereas nearly 1 in 3 and 1 in 4 men in the United States have experienced some form of physical violence by an intimate partner. And whereas many victims are deprived of their autonomy, liberty, and security, and face tremendous threats to their health, safety, and economic security, and the health, safety, and economic security of their children at the hands of their batterers. And whereas Domestic Violence Awareness Month provides an opportunity for citizens to learn more about preventing domestic violence and to show support for the numerous organizations and individuals who provide critical advocacy, services, and assistance to victims. Whereas commendation should be given to agencies who assist victims of domestic violence and devote their efforts toward ending domestic violence throughout our state and our nation. Now, therefore, I, George Van Duzen, Mayor of the Village of Skokie, do hereby proclaim the month of October 2022 as Domestic Violence Awareness Month and call upon the people of Skokie to raise awareness of the societal problem of domestic violence throughout our community and its devastating effects on families and communities. And I believe Charlotte Coates is with us. So Charlotte is a staff attorney with the Northern Suburban Legal Aid Clinic, and perhaps we can meet up here and you can share some words with us.
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you so much for including me tonight. I am Charlotte Coates, a staff attorney in the domestic violence law practice for the North Suburban Legal Aid Clinic. We provide free legal services in the areas of domestic violence, immigration, and housing, and we are so grateful for our partnership with the Village of Skokie to provide services to survivors of domestic violence. Thank you, Skokie, for rededicating each and every year to not looking away from the insidiousness of domestic violence in the suburbs. The spotlight that Skokie shines is a beacon for survivors. This year, I want to speak on one other topic inextricably linked to domestic violence and personal to me and the clinic, which has our office in Highland Park. Gun violence. 73% or more of mass shootings begin with domestic violence. The relationship between domestic violence and gun violence is undeniable. There is no daylight between them. They are mutual epidemics. We cannot ignore their inherent connection. Unfortunately, we have generous empirical data that confirms that mass shooting perpetrators begin as domestic violence victims, then perpetrators, then shooters. Violence is a learned behavior. Hatred is taught. And domestic violence is here in Skokie in great numbers. It does not discriminate between race, gender, socioeconomic status, or religion. It is here and needs our attention. So what can we do? Create safe spaces for people you know and people you could meet on your journeys to tell them that they are in abusive relationships. Actively listen when someone says that their partner controls who they talk to or whether they leave the house. Learn the signal and what to do when you see it. Learn about the abundant resources right here in the community, like my clinic, the North Suburban Legal Aid Clinic, that was founded 7 years ago because, among other things, there is such a need in Highland Park and Highwood for domestic violence legal services. Rededicate yourself to talking to your children about healthy relationships, about consent and self-worth. By addressing domestic violence, we address gun violence. We can do this together. Thank you.
Thank you. And the second proclamation is the Filipino American History Month. Whereas the earliest documented proof of Filipino presence in the continental United States was October 18th, 1587, when the first Luzones Indios set foot on the Morar Bay, California, on board the Manila-built galleon ship Nuestra Senora de Buena Esperanza, and whereas the Filipino American National Historical Society recognizes the year of 1763 as the date of the first permanent Filipino settlement in the United States in San Mosa Parish, Louisiana, which set in motion the focus on the story of our nation's past from a new perspective by concentrating on the economic, cultural, social, and other notable contributions that Filipino Americans have made in countless ways toward the development of the history of the United States. And whereas the Filipino American community is the second largest Asian American group in the United States, with a population of approximately 3.4 million people, Filipino Americans are an integral part of the United States healthcare system as nurses, doctors, and other medical professionals. And whereas Filipino American servicemen and servicewomen have a long-standing history serving within the United States of America, from the Civil War to the present Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts, including 250,000 Filipinos who fought under the flag of the United States during World War II to protect and defend this country. And whereas Filipino Americans have contributed greatly to the fine arts, music, dance, literature, education, business, journalism, sports, fashion, politics, government, science, technology, and other fields in the United States, which enrich the landscape of the United States. And whereas efforts must continue to promote the study of Filipino American history and culture, as mandated in the mission statement of the Filipino American National Historical Society, because the roles of Filipino Americans and other people of color have been overlooked in the writing, teaching, and learning of the United States. And whereas it is imperative for Filipino American youth to have a positive role model to instill in them the importance of education, complemented with the richness of their ethnicity and the value of their legacy. Now, therefore, I, George Van Dusen, Mayor of the Village of Skokie, do hereby proclaim the month of October 2022 as Filipino American History Month in the Village of Skokie, and do hereby urge the people of Skokie to observe Filipino American History Month with appropriate programs and activities. And I'd like to invite up Jelly Karandang on behalf of the Filipino community to accept this proclamation.
On behalf of the Filipino American community, I would like to express my appreciation to everybody for proclaiming October as Filipino American History Month. I'd like to share that since the U.S. Congress signed this in November 2009 and the Senate in September 2010, we've been getting the proclamation from the Village of Skokie. And also, our mayor signed the first proclamation ahead of the governor and the mayor of the city of Chicago. So that was an honor. It is indeed a pleasure to be in the Village of Skokie, because we lived in Chicago for a long time, and I've been in Skokie since 1986. And I'm very proud that other villages surrounding us envy us because of the service that we get from the village. And so I'll be here. And I'm trying to get our Filipino community here to participate in the village activities. Unfortunately, because of COVID, it's really hard to get them, join us here tonight. So thank you again very much, and thank you to our fellow Skokians. I'm glad that we are all here. Proud of the Village of Skokie. Thank you.
Next item is presentation of the 12th Annual Public Health Partners of Excellence Award. Presentation will be made by Dr. Edward Lynn, Chairman of the Board of Health, and Mike Charlie, Director of the Department of Health, with Sue Reesberg.
Yes. Good evening, Mayor Van Dusen and the Board of Trustees. My name is Mike Charlie. I'm the Director of the Health and Human Services Department for the Village of Skokie. And again, I have with me the Chair of the Board of Health, Dr. Edward Lynn. And I also have the Personal Health Services Supervisor, Sue Reesberg, here with me tonight. I want to say this is probably one of my favorite nights of the year, because instead of me coming and giving dour news on COVID or coming in and talking about something else, I will actually give awards out to some very deserving organizations. So for the Public Health Partners and Excellence Awards, each year, the Health and Human Services Department and the Board of Health recognize individuals or organizations that have provided exceptional support of public health initiatives in the community with this award. I have with me tonight Ed and Sue, like I said, and I'd like to present this award to two very deserving Skokie organizations. As I name each organization, I'd like to ask that each organization's representatives come on up. And I'm going to say a couple nice things about each organization. And we're also going to present to them, Ed's going to present to them this wonderful plaque. So I'm going to start off with the Heartland Health Center, Skokie. So with us tonight, I have Ms. Nicole Willis. She's the Chief Executive Officer. And I also have Ms. Raven Hibbler. She's the Director of Marketing and Communications. So come on up. So we're presenting this award to this organization for being a great partner in assisting Skokie residents with applying for state benefits such as Medicaid and SNAP. Heartland provides accessible mental health, women's health, dental services, immigrant senior care, and other essential health services to our Skokie residents who have lost coverage and or are uninsured. And these residents include our refugees, immigrants, and other residents. With our multiple languages that we serve in Skokie, which are quite a few, Heartland Health has always been able to provide us, the Health and Human Services Department, with documents in Arabic, Spanish, French, and English to share with Skokie residents. Heartland will keep Health and Human Services up to date with any changes in their programs, and has also been welcoming when Health and Human Services staff by with seasonal interns to provide them with information. We are very pleased to present this award to the Heartland Health Center Skokie. So thank you very much. You guys were nice. Thank you, guys. Okay. So the second organization that we'd like to acknowledge tonight is Kids First Pediatric Partners. And so I think tonight we have with us Dr. Kathy DiVincenzo. And who else do we have? Rebecca Allison, okay, one of the nurses there. You guys come on up. So this is just another wonderful organization. I think that when I first got here to Skokie, I know that Sue, I think every other word out of her mouth was Kids First Pediatric Partners, especially when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, because for them, they've immunized countless Skokie children with the COVID-19 vaccine. From day one, when COVID-19 vaccines were first available, Kids First readily accepted vaccine from the Health and Human Services Department and vaccinated children referred to them by us. And I want to say, at first it was very difficult to get providers to actually take the vaccine and vaccinate children, even though in the beginning, we were the primary agency to vaccinate individuals. It was a transition for providers to make that shift to vaccinating larger number of people. So they were one of the first providers to hold a drive-through COVID-19 vaccine clinics, ensuring individuals and families had easy access to the vaccine. Kids First has partnered with Health and Human Services throughout the years. We run a Vaccines for Children program, but if we don't use the vaccine, we know who to call if we have any left over before it expires. And they're able to use those vaccines to vaccinate children at no cost. And these children who might not otherwise have been vaccinated because of their inability to pay. We are very pleased to present this award to Kids First Pediatric Partners. Thank you so much. And then I just have some last words to say tonight is that, we really are grateful not only to these two organizations, to all the other providers and all the other healthcare organizations, social service organizations, behavioral health organizations, and we really look forward to these valuable partnerships. It really takes a village with public health. We have a staff downstairs that only can do so many things. So we will be publicizing the awards in a future edition of the Village's newsletter, the new Skokie, and the weekly Skokie News. So they will be recognized via that. And I want to say one last thing that's on the agenda. And someone here is going to be really mad at me tomorrow. But I do want to recognize Sue Riesberg. And this is somewhat impromptu. How long have you been here? How many years?
A long time.
Okay, Sue's retiring in about 2 weeks. And she's going to be sorely missed by the health department. Since I've been here, I remember when I was interviewed for this position, and John said, "Why do you want a job with the Village of Skokie?" I remember that question. And I remember I looked right at Sue and right at, the other supervisor at the time, Bruce Jones, and I said, the reason I want to come to the Village of Skokie is I have 2 supervisors who know their stuff. It's going to make it really easy for me to transition into my job. And without her, there's no way you would have seen the COVID response in the village. So I don't have a plaque for her tonight, but here you go. But thank you. Okay, well, thank you. That's it.
Well, and Mike, I want to thank you because I was going to recognize Sue, and now she'll be mad at you and not me, so thank you. She is truly a treasure, and we will miss you, Sue. It's been a pleasure having the opportunity to work with you, and there will be further words in the next couple weeks before it's official, but thank you. And thanks to Heartland and Kids First. The work you do is greatly appreciated, and thank you very much. Good evening. Next item on the agenda, report of our village manager, John Lockerbie.
Thank you, Mayor Van Duzen and Board of Trustees. Good evening, everyone. Item A is regarding a Cook County Class 7C real estate tax incentive. Economic Development staff is recommending a Class 7C real estate tax incentive for property located at 3818 Oakton Street to become the headquarters of Paradigm Mozart Healthcare. The current owner of the 3818 Oakton Realty LLC is a newly created real estate holding company related to Paradigm Mozart Healthcare, operating nursing homes in Midwestern and Southern states. Paradigm Mozart is new to Skokie, and the headquarters will initially employ over 20 workers and growing to approximately 40 over the next few years. The proposed renovation will include construction of upgraded offices, workstations, a conference room, employee lounge, masonry and exterior repair, new windows, drywall replacement, painting, carpeting, and other items, for an overall $600,000 project cost. A Class 7C incentive provides a 5-year property tax incentive for real estate that has been previously abandoned for more than 12 months and has been substantially rehabilitated and used primarily for commercial purposes. The property would be assessed at 10% of market value for the first 3 years, 15% in the 4th year, and 20% in the 5th year. The assessed valuation in 2020 was $177,430. The total real estate taxes dropped to $33,521 in 2021 due to the vacancy. However, after the sale and significant reinvestment, the assessed valuation is expected to rise to $253,000. After the end of the 5-year period, the total annual real estate tax amount is expected to be over $104,187. Without the incentive, the project is viewed as too risky to commence. Approval of the village board is necessary. I concur with staff's recommendation and their assessment that this project is an excellent candidate for a Class 7C designation. I respectfully request mayor and board approval of a resolution authorizing the classification.
A motion to do the Cook County Class 7C real estate tax incentive for 3818 Oakton Street is in order. Trustee Robinson, seconded by Trustee Sutker. Are there any comments or any questions? If not, call the roll, please.
Trustee Sutker?
Aye.
Trustee Robinson?
Aye.
Trustee Kuhn?
Aye.
Trustee Johnson?
Aye.
Trustee Pierce-Slovan?
Aye.
Trustee Klein?
Aye.
Mayor Van Duzen?
Aye, the motion passes.
Item B and item C were approved as part of tonight's consent agenda. Item D is a request for executive session. Pursuant to Section 2, Paragraph C5 and C6 of the State of Illinois Open Meetings Act, a closed session is requested and to adjourn therefrom.
A motion for executive session this evening is in order. Trustee Pure Slovan, seconded by Trustee Klein. Call the roll, please.
Trustee Sutker?
Aye.
Trustee Robinson?
Aye.
Trustee Kuhn?
Aye.
Trustee Johnson?
Aye.
Trustee Pierce-Slovan?
Aye.
Trustee Klein?
Aye.
Mayor Van Duzen?
Aye, the motion passes.
And that completes my report this evening.
Thank you. Next is our report of our Corporation Counsel, Michael Lorge.
Thank you, Mayor, trustees. Good evening, everyone. My report this evening contains only a memo, which I hope and assume everyone had some time to look at and read. It stems from the last board meeting when the board asked us to, that being the Corporation Counsel's office and the village manager's office, to look into furthering the discussion of a condominium deconversion provision to increase perhaps the size, a number of units that a builder or developer or other company would need to acquire in order to institute or instigate a deconversion process within a condominium building. We undertook to accomplish that, and as you see in my memo, we did prepare and attached a proposed ordinance. However, in working our way towards that ordinance, several questions arose. And they arose really from a number of items that we undertook. They were accelerated work that we put a lot of effort into and a lot of time into, and we did it in several ways. We did a significant amount of research. We did seek out articles that, law review article and other articles that gave some context to the whole discussion of deconversion, how it works as a factor in the marketplace, how it's worked in other locations. We also spent time speaking to corporation councils in other municipalities directly on this issue, most importantly with Evanston and with Oak Park, both of whom had considered this at one point in time. That didn't, I want to make it clear, those discussions and their determination did not really affect us in our ultimate, where we end up today. But it helped guide us a bit, as any information, when you glean information from different sources and individuals who have spent time on a subject, it just was added guidance. It was, it really came to the point that we found we had open questions that needed further resolution that we couldn't get from a source just like legal research, et cetera. And therefore, the real question is twofold. One, I mean, at its core, one is the clarification of whether or not a municipality in the state of Illinois that is a home rule municipality, while we have broad powers as a home rule authority, whether or not in this case, this situation, dealing with this particular ordinance and statute, we have the authority to go forward on it. And I have to say here, Corporations Counsel's office has an obligation not only to research and respond to this board, but also to give guidance when we feel there might be a circumstance of a lawsuit. We are not shying away from a lawsuit. Those of you in this community know that we have undertaken many serious lawsuits and championed the day for the village. But at the same time, we have to be very circumspect what we're getting into. I think it's an open question. I think it's one that we could get resolved most easily by speaking to the Attorney General's office and get some further insight there. There is nothing that is clear-cut on this issue. Otherwise, I would be suggesting we go one way or another. And secondarily, I don't think it occurred to, at least not to me, when we had the discussion on September 19th, and that's the question of not being arbitrary in setting a threshold on this. we need, if we are going to say, now the city of Chicago, you all know, it applies to all condominiums of any size. It's a different marketplace possibly. Here we have condominiums of various sizes and condominium buildings of various sizes. And we have to think through, is this ordinance to apply to all of them or to only those over a certain size? We could all put a number in a hat and see what we draw out, but a court might not look kindly on that. And so we really feel that we have to do some additional quick work to get some kind of data to provide to you a rational basis, and there the village manager's office will be keenly helpful in some sort of rational basis as to what size we land on, if any size. It may just be, it should be a blanket kind of thing we bring back. So that's where we're at. That was the nature of the memorandum. I don't know if it was faster to read my 3 pages or to listen to me now speak to the issue, but either way, if there are any questions, I would take them now.
Trustee Kuhn.
I have a question. Do we have any records in terms of how many deconversions have happened in Skokie in recent years?
My understanding, unless you have different information, is that there was one, and it was a number of years ago.
And I guess just to follow up on that, I'm trying to understand how us, the village of Skokie, having a lower threshold would invite developers to look at deconversion condos in Skokie. And is this a strategy that would be better suited to be addressed by the state in terms of creating a sort of a fair threshold across municipalities?
I think you raise an interesting question. The state law is in place, and so it's obvious, it would absolutely be an item that the state could take up.
Trustee Johnson.
I just wanted to ask, especially about your communications with Evanston and Oak Park, about the other municipalities that have dealt with this issue, like kind of what you learned about what prompted them to look into this and kind of how they navigated this question.
As to what prompted them to consider it, it was more or less sort of an organic thing like this. It wasn't like it came out of a overall review of development or economic development. It was something that was somewhat organic. Oak Park in particular came to the conclusion of the issue of, on the issue of whether or not they had the home rule authority to do so. But that occurred prior to Chicago making its decision. And so, again, that's why there's a push-pull here. Oak Park decidedly felt it did not have that authority. Chicago, being the institution that it is, decided that it did. And Chicago was not sued, but we know also, unfortunately, from history here and in other municipalities, often people look for what they perceive to be smaller communities to litigate with.
And Naperville considered it?
Naperville also considered it, but I didn't have the same relationship, so I have not made that contact yet. It may be that the village manager's office will close that loop.
Okay.
Excuse me, I have a question that I just don't understand. I was informed that Trilogy owned these properties since 2016. People who wanted to sell, sold. People who don't want to, obviously haven't. When did the fire come that we, all of a sudden, since 16, what's that, 6 years ago, 7? What happened that all of a sudden they're acting on this now?
I don't want to respond for another entity, but I would surmise, and from some of what we've heard here, and from some of what our staff has indicated to us, it's a market-generated, it's a market-driven decision. And we know that the setting of condominiums versus apartments in terms of what people are seeking and perhaps where there's greater revenue, it would flow from that. But that, I don't know that that really is germane to the decision we're all trying to make. Why it's occurring now or why it isn't is less important than doing what's good for the community as a whole. John, you may want to add, I don't know.
I think that covers it.
Thank you, gentlemen.
So at the next meeting, you and John will report back, and the ordinance is prepared.
The ordinance
If
will be
you've concluded we have the authority.
correct. If we have the authority delineated and we'll tackle that and get it done, then we would bring back the ordinance that's attached here, so any comments are welcome now to that, because we consider the guts of it in place. We spent the time to do that. And we will have to then have a rational reason to set in a size of building, or it would apply to all buildings.
Of any size.
Of any size. So, of course, the board can make that change when we report back. But we can at least explain what we choose to recommend at that point.
Trustee Sucker.
But that's one of the questions you have is, can we make different, a decision based on a certain size of condominium? Can we write something?
We would hope to be able to search some data and develop some rational basis. And then we just would have to defend that rational basis. But right now, we don't even have data.
Right, I get that, okay.
So we're gonna spend the next week, we already have some ideas on how we collect some of that data. Even going to Trustee Kuhn's suggestion of what's the history, well, we should begin by looking at that one that was deconverted.
Please remind me how many apartments or condos are in the building, and of it, the percentage of those who still are owners versus renters?
Do you know? I know it, but I don't remember it.
Neither do I, that's why I was asking.
I'm going to use approximate. There's approximately 260 units in the tower, and there's approximately 170 owned by Trilogy. But don't.
It's 277 units altogether, and at last count, there was 175.
Thank you. The concluding item of the public agenda this evening is public comment. Is there anybody who wishes to address the board? Yes, ma'am.
Good evening, Mayor Van Duzen and Village Board trustees. I'm Beth Demas, and I'm here tonight to speak to you about the Tui Lindner development. I'm not here to oppose the development, only to raise some questions and criticisms about the design of the development with respect to energy efficiency and sustainability. And I realize that I should have raised these issues at the public hearing back in August, but this project only crossed my radar recently. As you know, Skokie's greenhouse gas audit showed that buildings represent the largest share of greenhouse gas emissions. And I believe now is the time for us to make sure that any new buildings, once they're built, they're up for a very long time, maybe 100 years. Now is the time to make sure they're designed and built to drive greenhouse gas emissions down to as close as possible to zero. My comments may be too late for the Tui Lindner development, but I hope that maybe I can influence other large developments in the community that might be under consideration. I'd like to give you some context about myself before I give my remarks. First, I've been honored to serve on the Skokie Sustainability Steering Committee, a tremendous effort of both time and resources, and I've had the privilege of working with a very impressive and dedicated group of people. And I look forward to speaking to all of you more about this sustainability plan at a later time. Second, you should know that I've been developing affordable multifamily housing for the past 25 years. In that time, I've developed 14 affordable senior living communities throughout the Chicago suburban area. So although I consider myself to be a good guy developer with a mission, I'm nevertheless a developer, and I understand how difficult it is to get development done, especially getting through the municipal process. I've had more than my fair share of public meetings filled with vocal residents who have organized against my proposed developments. But I also understand the need for high-quality, sustainably designed development. For the past 10 years, my organization has designed and developed buildings that follow several green certification programs, including the National Green Building Standard, Enterprise Green Communities, and the Energy Star certification program. All of this brings me back to the Tui Lindner development. I've read the staff report and all the related documents, and I have the following comments. The first comment has to do with something called Green Globe certification. I've heard, but I didn't find it anywhere in the documentation that the developer has promised to pursue Green Globe certification. I have two issues with this. The first is that I found nowhere in the village's approval of the development where Green Globe certification is a condition of the approval. So unless I'm missing something, this means that the developer could simply decide not to pursue that certification. The second issue with Green Globes itself. I had never heard of this certification program, so I contacted some industry colleagues to see what they knew. And what I learned was that Green Globes has been around for a while, and that it's an extremely flexible program, which makes it great for developers, but not so great for municipalities. The problem seems to be that while the standards may seem rigorous, apparently it's easy for developers to get waivers from them and still get certification. The one thing that concerned me the most when I learned about this program was for multifamily developments, and that is that Green Globes does not require blower door testing of units. Now, I don't know if most of you know what a blower door test is, but on all of our certified apartment buildings, our units go through these blower door tests that test how tight they are and make sure that there's no energy or heat or cooling that's leaking out of them. So in my opinion, for this project, at a minimum, a better certification to require would be the Energy Star certification program. And of course, you can go up from there to LEED and National Green Building Standard, and there are a number of other certification programs that are better. I just have a couple of other comments about the design of the building. I'll be brief. With respect to parking, it appears that the village has not required the developer to install EV charging stations in a certain percentage of the parking spots. Again, maybe I'm missing something, but I didn't see any conditions in the documents. Given the push for electric vehicles, I would think that this would be something the village would require developers seeking PUD, zoning change, or other accommodations from the village. Bird strike mitigation is encouraged but not required. My question is, why is it not required? I remember this being a big deal with Carvana, and I believe the mayor or somebody said we would pursue mitigations on future buildings. So my question is, why aren't we just requiring it? And then finally, with all of the space on the roof of the two buildings, the developer should have been required to make the building solar panel ready. So maybe they don't want to install the panels today, but they should make the building, and it's not that expensive. We've done it on one of our buildings, and then we added solar panels. At a minimum, their designs should accommodate future installation of solar panels. In closing, I'd like to say that I would like to see Skokie be a leader, not a follower, on sustainable design, requiring more from private developers of large projects. I suspect that we're afraid that if we do this, we will be discouraging development. But I think we should give ourselves more credit as a community than that. We are a great place for development. We're close to the city, we have ample public transportation and lots of amenities. We are a richly diverse community. We should be expecting more in terms of sustainability from developers who want to build here. So let's demand the best. Thank you.
John?
As you're aware, the village is in the process of developing our second sustainability plan, and a number of these items are included in those current goals yet to be finalized. But in addition to that, before the goals are finalized, the staff continues to encourage, the developers to adhere to those principles. And so the building that you are speaking about, the future development, for example, is being equipped to accommodate solar on the roof in the future. And so the developer is committed to future-proofing the building. And then bird mitigation as well. The building incorporates the bird mitigation measures, bird strike mitigation measures. But there's also a policy that is being developed by the village. The village just can't require it, mandate it, until the policy is approved. And so that's in the works, but it hasn't been codified. And so it's still a conversation with the developers and soon to be, before the appropriate approval bodies for their consideration.
Good evening, Ralph Rubner, rabbi and attorney, again. I have a short statement based on the review that I have had of the legal memo. I've read the legal memo prepared by Mr. Lorge and the village legal staff, and for that I thank you and for your diligent work. Your report basically concludes that our request for an 85% approval rate, which all of you unanimously voted on first reading, that it is really an open question, one of first impression outside of the city of Chicago. However, the memo does not contradict the legal position and the arguments that I forwarded to him on your authority under home rule to act. It appears that in the name of unnecessary precaution and caution and fear of litigation, the question has been forwarded to the Attorney General for a legal opinion. Well, this raises another problem for us. For the real possibility that Trilogy will act quickly to make their offers under a very tight statutory time period in order to get 75% approval under the current statute of the state, and before the Attorney General has an opportunity to give you an opinion and for you to finalize your ordinance. The irony does not escape me that the first condo building in Skokie that could realistically deconvert to a deluxe rental facility is a building that has among its current owners elderly individuals, persons with disabilities, immigrants and refugees, survivors, descendants, and relatives of victims of the Shoah who will be forced to sell and evacuate their homes, a building that neighbors the Illinois Holocaust Museum. Don't let this unnecessary delay reward Trilogy. I ask you to be courageous at this time. You've been courageous on many issues before, including a few weeks ago on the gun issue. I was here and I heard the mayor, and I applaud you. I ask you to be equally courageous now. Please adopt this ordinance with all the work that goes into finalizing it at your next meeting. And I thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Sure.
I thought I'd never be before you again. My name is Asher Bronfeld. I live at 9725 Woods Drive. It's the building that's at question here in terms of the deconversion proposal. Can you hear me? Okay. I have no specific opinion about whether 75% or 85% is the proper percentage for an affirmative vote for a condominium sale. I don't know. I don't know what prompted that original percentage back in 1963 on the part of Illinois. It's been the standard since then, so I'm not really going to comment on that. As a board member, and as I was called 2 weeks ago, a disinterested board member of the Maple Board, I'm the president, I've tried to maintain a very neutral stance. But what may have worked for Switzerland over the last couple of hundred years isn't working for me in 2022. So I'm only here to comment on the idea that it's our request. You've heard Rabbi Rubner say that on 3 different occasions. I don't know what our request means. I've asked a variety of residents to send in their opinions. At the first time that I brought this up to the attention of the condominium owners was back before you even heard about the conversions, back on September 5th, where I sent out a letter stating that there were 3 broad groups in our building. There was the No Way, No How group. There was Praise the Lord, Hallelujah, I can finally sell my unit group. And then there was the Price is Right group, let's see what the bid is. What is going to be offered? And the composition of those groups has not changed in one direction or another, although it's grown a little bit towards the second 2 groups that I mentioned. So I've asked our residents to send in letters. I've adopted a neutral stance on this. I don't favor one group versus another, but I would ask the board, in considering this, what is the problem that you are facing, and is the solution that you're thinking about actually adequately address that problem? If the problem is that you simply don't want a condominium building to be sold by a large approval rate of their residents, then say so. If the problem is that you feel that this is a coercive sale of some sort, where X percentage, a large majority, can force a smaller minority to adhere to the majority rule, well, then say so. But if the point of the matter is to try to increase the value that's achieved by the residents by having a higher standard, well, then say so too. I got a very mixed message listening 2 weeks ago to the deliberations and the quick vote and approval of the motion as to what the purpose was. And frankly, many of our residents, some have written into you, many have written into me, asking me to represent them up here, really didn't understand what you were aiming for. Were you aiming to simply kill the deal, to make it as hard as possible so they could not sell out their units? Or was your purpose to raise the possible price that the owners would get upon completion, upon the successful completion of a deconversion? Obviously, they can always vote against it. So there's a lot of uncertainty on the part of my residents, and I listen to them all the time. It's not a group of 2. There's 102 units involved. Over 30 of them are owners who have already rented out their units. They certainly will have a different opinion than others. Rabbi Rubner mentioned, for example, all the people with disabilities, the elderly, the refugees, the Shoah victims. Well, I'm all for. Okay, I was born in a displaced persons camp in Skokie. I was 72 years old two days ago, all right? So I don't think he's representing me, and I don't think he's representing every other person in those groups. So I just asked the question, what's the purpose of the ordinance, and does the solution being offered adequately address it? Thank you very much.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
I don't understand. The 30 people who you say own and rent.
32 actually,
Oh,
but okay.
Okay, let's say 30 because.
Sure, 30, fine.
Okay.
30%.
Are they in favor of selling to Trilogy?
Some are not. Some,
Well-
I have two of them that I know for sure. One person wrote me and said, I'm gonna be out of the country for 4 months. I vote no. He doesn't care what the bid is, he just votes no. There's another person sitting here today who's adamantly against it. But the others, I've heard from some that are in favor of it, The reason that they're renting their units is because they couldn't sell their units. As has been explained to you before, when you have a large ownership group in any building, banks are reluctant to lend, to finance mortgages. Some of the residents have written into you about that problem.
Yes.
And that problem's not gonna go away. If this deconversion dies tomorrow, the status quo ain't that great for those people. If you're trying to sell a unit, if I tried to sell my unit tomorrow, I would have to find a cash buyer or someone with a very substantial down payment. Otherwise, I'd have to take a large discount on my unit. And this situation has been faced many times. Many of the owners who are renting lived in our building at one time. They decided they wanted to move. Person living next door to me lived there. We were friends with them. We were friends with the renters. They moved out. They couldn't sell. They rented their unit. So some of those, you can imagine, might be favorably disposed to hearing what the bid is from a deconverter. There are others who have written me, who have explained to me that they were misinformed when they purchased. I was one of those. Misinformed as to the number of units that had been sold originally by Optima. We were faced with that situation back in 2011. Trilogy simply took over the position that Optima had created when they decided to stop selling their units. That 171, now 175, that 171 units was the situation at the end of 2011, and it stayed that way when Trilogy bought the units, and now Trilogy has decided that it serves their best interest to buy out the entire building. And that's where the economics are. I've looked at appraisals, I've looked at a possibility of getting appraisals for our owners, and our building will appraise higher as a full rental building versus a full condominium building. That's the economics. The economics weren't like that 30 years ago. That's when conversions were occurring. Rental buildings were turning into condominiums because the economics favored it. Well, now the economics are the opposite. 10 years from now, it may reverse again. But that's the economics. That's why you have deconversions going on in Chicago, and they're continuing to go on in Chicago. Even with the 85% number, our attorney, for example, just closed a couple of weeks ago on a 250-unit building in the city of Chicago. So it still goes on. This makes it harder. It also increases the risks. There's risks and reward. The reward would be that we would get a higher bid at the end of the process. The risk is it blows up, and the people that wanted to sell may not be able to sell at the prices they could have gotten during a deconversion.
Why is it that you won't give us numbers? You say you
Numbers
have
on-
3 categories of people.
Because I don't have an exact count.
I thought you said you were in touch with them all.
I'm not in touch with every one of the 102. I'm getting responses, and I don't like to characterize a person's position. For example, I may get a letter that says, I want the 85% conversion, but he sort of tells me, well, I'm not sure if that'll help us or hurt us. That doesn't mean that they're taking it down. And also, many people don't want to reveal their exact vote to you in advance. We're probably going to get a bid soon. Then you'll have a better idea of what the count is. But I guarantee you, it's not going to be all no's.
Thank you for your time.
Anybody else?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Hi, I did know I'd be back here. My name is Kimberly Polka. I'm a Skokie resident. I would like to start by asking a question of the General Counsel, and I'd like to understand what the rules are over using the village seal. Can I put the village seal on something and just send mailers all over Skokie?
No, that the village uses the seal as our official recognition, one of our official recognition pieces. And so there are, it's closely monitored, and our Director of Marketing and Communications consistently adheres to the regulations and ensures that it's not being utilized outside of kind of the
Right.
acceptable uses.
And that makes sense. It wasn't really a gotcha, but I just wanted to, I'm assuming that it's Illinois law. I won't get into all the rabbit holes I went down. It's not in the Skokie code, but I did, whatever, I'm getting down a rabbit hole, I'll spare you. It's reasonable, right? Because if I could put the village seal on anything and spread something all over Skokie, it could look like it was something official coming from Skokie, correct? So if somebody who's an elected official, not on this board, and I realize school boards are separate, is posting on social media with his position, his personal position, on citizen-led referenda with the village seal, can the corporate counsel send him a cease and desist? I used to work in law offices. I have called, I talked to you, Nick Wyatt, last week. He did take it down off of Facebook. An hour ago, it was still on Nextdoor. That post is from over a week ago. It is inappropriate. I'm also curious, I think I know the answer. I live in Skevinston. I live in a very religious neighborhood. I am Jewish too. I love sukkahs. I see, Sukkah Madness signs in the parkway. Who's gonna be mad about a Sukkah Madness sign? So I probably have signs right now that might be, if you drew my property lines, might be on the parkway side, but I try to keep them back. But I got a picture from somebody today with a sign in a parkway against the referendums, at a vacant lot where they said that the owner had passed away, next to a bus stop on Oakton. I'm saying a lot because I can say a lot of things, and this gets very complicated because everybody up there knows what I'm talking about, and I am trying to not be political. The referendums we did not try to make political. We tried to make them nonpartisan. There are now signs in parkways that have a caucus party emblem on them. There are photos circulating with 3/4 of the board in that photo. There is a very blurry line between where the caucus party is and where the government sits. And I am hearing this from other people, and it is not a good look. I want to be clear. Signs don't vote. I don't care where I see your signs. I know where they are. I know where they aren't. Signs don't vote. But to me, it gives the impression that because we have a lot of caucus party that I'm looking at right now, that you can do things that we cannot because you're in both places. And it doesn't seem right. It feels like David versus Goliath. It doesn't seem right when somebody is allowed to use the village seal, and that has been brought to the village's attention, and I would hope that we would all play on a level playing field. We did not try to make this issue partisan. I still believe it's nonpartisan, and it is, I want to be honest, the first time I saw the sign, it looked like the logo was copied and pasted. I thought someone took your logo and put it on a sign. I didn't realize, but now based on where it is, I know, and where people who are, and 3/4 of the board being in a photo with it. I don't mind your signs. You are residents too. You can have an opinion, but let's all play by the same rules. It doesn't feel right.
The direction that was provided to the individual that you brought to the staff's attention was told to not use the seal. So if there's still situations where that seal is being utilized, if you would let me know, I would appreciate it.
110% because it's gone off of Facebook. But like I said, when I talked to Mr. Wyatt last week, it was also on Nextdoor. It is still on Nextdoor as of an hour before this meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Klein is smiling in anticipation. So this time, it's not going to be a whole lot of science, but it is going to be kind of building on the sustainability plan stuff that I've been talking about. And I'm going to keep on making this disclaimer. I realize the plan is not finalized. The plan has not been voted on yet. I'm talking about hypotheticals. Okay, so for the, right now, I would like to just talk about the case for tweaking. I'm not asking this building to be put aside. I'm just saying, and I appreciate the comments that Mr. Lockerbie made about Ms. Demas's comments about how nothing has been codified yet, or may not be codified, but we can still, especially if they are asking for a zoning variance, you can insist on whatever you want, I think. I mean, please correct me if that's not true, but I think you can make much more stringent requirements.
We cannot create arbitrarily standards which do not exist in law. I mean, we can't we can't say you have to put a helicopter on top of the building. Well, no, I mean,
Right. You're, okay, I
I
understand.
think there's a misunderstanding that we can insist on things because we think they're right and they're good. The reason we are going through this whole sustainability process, and John is helping head up writing a bird mitigation ordinance, is so there is a standard. When a developer comes to the village, they ask us, what is it that is required? And ordinarily, they have a lawyer who's probably a land use lawyer who has looked into our ordinance and our rules and regulations, and that begins the standard. Now, we can encourage certain things be done, but whether in fact we can force them to do it is a whole different thing. So I just, when you say, well, it's a zoning variance, it's a zoning variance, that's it. You can't say, you don't get the zoning variance if you don't do A, B, and C. You'll wind up in court and you'll lose. We've all seen it. And we are being very cautious on the deconversion. We're being very cautious in what we're doing on sustainability. And as soon as we get the plan and John and Michael and the staffs get together, we will begin to entertain ordinances to implement all of that. Then you can apply it with a certain amount of strictness. So municipal land use is complicated, as they say.
And that's actually one of the classes in what I mentioned to you late last week. Let's consider this as maybe suggestions to offer to the developers. But I also have some questions about how the Plan Commission does things, because according to the Plan Commission's report on this building, the request was considered and to the degree possible address the adverse effects on the natural environment. No adverse effects on the natural environment are anticipated. But in their opinion, if you asked me, I would say there are plenty of adverse effects on the environment. First of all, if you want to be really technical about it, any building that is not made with 100% recycled materials and made with equipment that's 100% renewable energy has an adverse effect on the environment as you're building the thing. You're running the motors, you're extracting the building materials, and so on. And then, if it's not built to passive house standards, the operation of the building is going to have an adverse effect on the environment. And I'm going to keep on bringing up passive house standards because after having been in one, let me tell you, it's amazing. And I feel like that is the future of us on this planet. So another issue is the soil, and this actually affects all of the people who live in that area, something that should be considered, and I have no idea how to mitigate this. I'm just bringing this up as an issue, that this soil is in a place with very heavy automobile traffic, and all of the emissions from the car, or shouldn't say all, a lot of the emissions from the cars kind of like diffuse out and then will settle in the soil. And now that soil has heavy metals, including lead. And when you disturb that soil, you're kicking it up into the air and it drifts around, and people walking by are inhaling it, and the workers are inhaling it, and the people who live there are inhaling it, and it's settling on their yards. I have small children, one of whom is constantly sticking her hand in her mouth and everything else she can find, even though she's almost 7. To work on that. But all of that stuff would get into her system. So this is just a thing to keep in mind when I wish the Planning Commission would take more of a holistic environmental approach when they're making these decisions. This morning I spoke with Carter O'Brien, who used to be the sustainability director at the Field Museum, and now he is one of the Chicago Building Decarbonization Working Group members. And he said, he was talking about, among other things, I spoke to him about this building, and we were talking about this future-proofing that Mr. Lockerbie mentioned, and that's what the developer said, oh, we're future-proofing it by making it ready to be 100% electric. But he says decarbonization is coming, meaning it will be mandated. If you commit to something like natural gas, it will be increasingly expensive, right? Because as more and more people decarbonize, it's going to be harder and harder to get it. So there's going to be a point in the very near future, I mean, you guys can read, that I'll summarize, there's a point in the very near future where they're going to just not use those gas pipes, right? And I asked the developer, why are you putting the gas pipes in there in the first place if you know within 5 years people aren't going to use it? So the developer said something, and the only word I understood was economics, and this is, but he said something about, the economics of the situation, and didn't make any sense to me, and I'll come back to that in a little bit. But so Mr. O'Brien said calling it electric ready is like saying I baby-proofed my house by getting rid of the open fire pit in the middle of the living room, right? That's not baby-proofing. So some tweaks about this building. One of the things that just stood out to me a lot immediately last meeting were these windows. This is Linder, and this is Tui, right? So now you're looking east on Tui, and all of this glass, this is a greenhouse. And they're not, aside from these balconies, the location of these balconies, they're not doing anything to mitigate that greenhouse that is going to be generated inside all of those south-facing units. And it's going to be very expensive and energy intensive to cool it. So making, like I said, the balconies actually, when the sun is high in the summer, these balconies will actually shade, but these top 2 floors are still going to be greenhouses. I can tell you this from my personal experience. I lived in a unit for 5 or 6 years that is south-facing, and all along one wall, the long way of the wall, we had windows. And it got very hot in the summer, and we did not have central air. So when the sun is high, yes, these 3 balcony windows are shaded, but making these windows smaller and just high up in the wall will still allow natural light, but it will reduce the size of the hole in the wall that's just being stopped up by some weak glass. Or you could put some kind of solar panel awning on there, like the building in Carroll Park, in Oak Park, which is really cool. They actually put high windows, and then they shaded it with solar panels from the roof, so that in the summer when the sun is high, it's not coming in the windows at all. Right. So, but the one problem with the balconies is that you need a thermal break because the way they're frequently attached. I do ask for your indulgence because a lot of other speakers spoke for a long time this evening. So the way the balconies are frequently attached conducts heat straight out of the building, but there is a way to construct the balconies so that doesn't happen. This is another thing that will save energy. It will save money for for the residents, because I looked at the floor plans and they all have individual heating and cooling. Another thing is triple glazing the windows, and this is a thing that if I were you, I would really push. The one thing to push over everything else would be triple glazing the windows. Especially if it has argon or even krypton, which is better than argon for an insulator, because the krypton triple glazed windows have an R value of over 8. So you're doing really well, and it's like that building I mentioned that was passive in Oak Park. There were kids, it was a park right outside, kids screaming. You couldn't hear them at all because of the triple glazing. And this is Tui, right? We've all been on Tui in this intersection. It's very loud. And I wouldn't want to live on that side of the street unless you had these triple glazed windows. The trees, this will be my last point. So these trees, he mentioned specifically that these were going to be ginkgo trees. The problem with ginkgo trees is that, right, so I'll come back to why ginkgo trees are not optimal here, because again, keep in mind this is the south side of the building. And then instead of whatever this is, use drought tolerant and native bushes. And then instead of all of this turf grass, which you have to maintain, and let's face it, they're probably gonna hire people who use gas power mowers, there are other alternatives for this. So the problem with ginkgo trees, yes, they're fast growing, but the canopy is not very dense, right? This is not a shade tree. And while this one is a little bit thicker, notice how tall it is relative to the width of the canopy. Like, these are not ideal. And I know the village has been putting them in some of the medians and parkways, and we should move away from doing that because there are better options for what we're trying to accomplish. So I'm sorry that this went so long and there are more slides, but that's all.
Thank you. Trustee Sucker.
I move we adjourn for executive session.